Now let's take a look at subquery syntax. As with the previous course, I am in my local installation, my client installation of the Oracle documentation, and I'm in the master book list. I'm going to go and look for my SQL language reference, and it's right here. I'm not going to look at the quick reference, I'm going to look at the language reference. I'm going to click HTML. I'm going to do Control F, hit select till I find the select statement. A subquery is actually a select statement. It's a query. And really, actually, it is simply just a query, because if we go down into syntax, we'll see a select statement defined as a subquery. The subquery factoring clause is something else. We'll look at it shortly. It's called the with clause. But essentially, a select statement is a subquery. Even when you only have a single select statement with no subquery involved, it's still a subquery. It's an expression. So now, let's go and look at the syntax in detail. Just look at the various different options. So I'm going to close the documentation window, and I'm going to go to here, which is a text file. And I have some simple examples and explanations of how a subquery is and or can be used in Oracle SQL. So here, for instance, select anything from anything where something in, well, you actually would have a column or a value, is in the results of a subquery. In this case, the subquery becomes a list of in elements, so you can have more than one value returned by the subquery. In this second case, we're doing where column, and obviously or something else, or expression, is equal to subquery. This requires the subquery to return a single value. You can't ask Oracle if a column is equal to more than one value. It's not possible. You just get an error. In this case, we're selecting something from calling, as in I'm talking about this up here being the calling query, where something is in. Again, I left out the column specs, not that important. I'm just going through basic pseudo syntax. And then select from child where column equals calling column. What this is actually called a correlated subquery, where you create a correlation or a connection between the calling query right here and the subquery by allowing the passing of a value from the calling query into the subquery, allowing a related connection between the two tables or the two data sources from here, from there. All this next statement says is actually that this thing here, subquery in brackets, is exactly the same as the syntax for a select statement. In other words, a select statement is a subquery, which you might have noticed is exactly what is actually in the Oracle documentation. The subquery, by definition, a subquery is a select statement. It is a query. Simple as that. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a thing called the subquery factoring clause, which is a thing called a with clause. What it allows you to do is to create a query in memory and assign it a name, and you can create multiples and you can embed them, and then later on in a following query that uses the things that the with clause declared, you can create a query that uses the things created by the with clause or with clauses. So the with clause allows you to pre-process row sets and pre-process queries. It's allowing you to break it down into pieces. So you don't need things like temporary tables anymore like you did many years ago. It's a lot simpler. That's the very basics of subquery syntax. It's not complicated. Just remember that it is a select statement in itself, a subquery, which is called from another query, but a select statement that isn't called from another query is a subquery in itself because it is expressional. SQL is declarative, implying that you create the query and it runs and produces a result. It doesn't go in steps. We have interdependent steps that create things that rely on other things in a sequence. That's modular coding or modular programming. Not quite the same thing.